Athletes, Coach Blu here. Have you ever asked yourself the question, why is it so hard to just stop using? Well, there's little more tempting than trying to find a quick solution to a big problem. Something that we've all tried to do in our lives. If we could have simple solutions to really big problems, can you imagine all the stuff you'd be able to accomplish? Well, I'm a firm believer that initially we kind of think that the drug or the alcohol, the substance of choice, is going to take away that pain. It's going to take away those problems. But as you know, it doesn't quite work that way. The more you use, the more repetitive your behavior gets, the stronger the compulsion to continue to use that substance to cover that pain truly becomes. Now, this evolves over time, and there's not really a stock limit for how long it does take for you to become addicted to a substance. With opiates, it can be fairly quick. With other things such as marijuana, THC, maybe a little longer, but to each their own. There's no rule book or playbook on how long it's going to take before you truly become addicted. But there's more in it than just the actual drug itself. There are behaviors. There are experiences and activities that we do in the pursuit of the drug that also become part of the story. And over long-term use, your brain actually begins to change its function, and it actually gets hardwired, making it extremely hard to just say no. So as we've had more research come out about addiction in the brain, is it a disease? Is it a choice? That's a whole different discussion for another time. We're not going to get into that. But traditionally, I think we've done a really poor job explaining to you out there who may be struggling with a drug addiction, really what it does and why we're so compelled to continue to use it. For most of history, substance use and drug addiction has been looked upon as a moral failure. And over time, as society saw these moral failings, we started seeing more political interest and private market interest and even religious interest on helping people overcome. Now, one of the big problems is that's all attached to money. Another story for another time. But we've definitely learned over the past 20 years that substance abuse is tied to a few very specific factors. Something I've learned about many years ago and seen 20 years ago as I started my journey as a mental health therapist and addictions counselor is that people typically use to cover some kind of pain. What we've seen more recently is that addictive behavior can absolutely grow out of traumatic experiences. Now, people don't typically party themselves into addiction. That sounds kind of funny because that's typically where it's introduced, but we don't party ourselves into addiction. We don't party ourselves into addiction. We all know that one kid back in high school or even college that took things a little too far, went to the extreme while he was there, but ended up having a decent lifestyle, maybe a functional family, and he's okay. But this is where I think the roads kind of split. There are those that have those experiences and can be just fine. They want to ride the pony to see how far they can go, and then once it's over, they're done. But then, 9 times out of 10, there's the other side of the coin, and these are people like myself who find that a substance, a very specific substance, fills the void or the gap of that pain that we've tried to suppress for so many years, and then that becomes part of our playbook of life with addiction. We take that play of using this substance, being able to avoid dealing with the trauma, dealing with the issue, and the brain becomes rewired around that at all costs necessary. Use this substance to avoid this pain, and then after a while, as we start building a tolerance and the withdrawal factor begins to widen, guess what happens? We become addicted. So then, if we know that it lives in the brain, what can we do about this? Because again, people will say, is it a disease, coach? Well, yes. But I thought it was a choice, coach. Well, yes. Do not pitch your tent on either one of those foundations. It doesn't matter. What truly matters is what it's doing to you, what you're believing about yourself, and how it's truly suppressing your ability to cope with life's problems and trauma, to excuse them instead of suppressing them. Because sooner or later, everyone, they will absolutely come out. So there is absolutely a link between drug use and dopamine. We know this from brain models. So one thing we really truly know about, utilizing brain scan imagery, doctors have absolutely found the connection of an individual's taste of alcohol and the subsequent release of dopamine, the pleasure response, with really very little research done on the part of the brain located deep in the right ventricle stratum that scientists discover, mimic, and produce behavior that's motivated by the anticipation of the reward. The cause and the effect. This is where things get a little bit tricky. See, when you have a trigger, a compulsion, you use, that release of dopamine reinforces the fact that this is the means to an end, and you keep repeating that, it becomes a way of life until it systematically begins to consume you from the inside out. As the brain rewires itself to understand to move the trauma away, to avoid all the pain, not just traumatic pain, but emotional pain, spiritual pain, physical pain, mental pain, it creates the same pathways, making it harder and harder for you to cope with life, really, as they say, on life's terms. See, our brain makes addiction recovery super difficult because it changes our addiction into addictive behaviors as well. All behaviors that are learned can be unlearned. That's why it's super important to put yourself in new situations, such as Team Addict II Athlete. Instead of sitting around a group just talking about addiction, now we do it and recreate and move, because movement equals dopamine. Erase and replace. The best bet you have in beating addiction is using a very calculated, mechanical, in-depth program of your choosing and fully immersing yourself in it to seek cognitive behavioral therapy, emotional therapy, maybe EMDR trauma therapy, health recreation, healthy eating, good sleeping. You need to physically rewire your brain back into a more natural state of dopamine release and serotonin-inducing experiences. So why is it so hard for some of us to overcome addictions? Because our brains have been rewired to avoid pain at any means necessary. Athletes, we're going to jump into more of these topics along the way. The more you know about what's going on inside that melon of yours, the stronger your heart's going to become, and the further on down the line you'll go to help turn the mess of addiction into the message of sobriety.